Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director here at MUFON LA. We have a great presentation tonight. Is there an NSA Project Aquarius which deals with UFOs? The first indication of such a project was found in a telex revealed by UFO researcher Bill Moore in a document marked secret and dated November 17, 1980. The following sentence appeared in the document, quote, "The official U.S. government policy and results of Project Aquarius is still classified top secret, with no dissemination outside official intelligence channels and with restricted access to MJ-12. Only this controversial document and one other UFO-related document found through the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, requests refer to a Project Aquarius. However, the existence of an umbrella project that covers the study of extraterrestrial biological life forms has again come to the foreground with veteran researcher Bill Hamilton. His investigation of microbiologist Dan Burisch has led to many interesting mysteries. This mysterious scientist claims to have worked under Project Aquarius at Papoose Mountain in an underground biological lab. Burisch confided in Hamilton that he was a working group leader who obtained over 200 tissue samples from a live extraterrestrial biological entity known as J-Rod. In his presentation for MUFON LA, Hamilton will present information in support of Dr. Burisch's claims. This exciting talk will include slides and video that examine recent findings in astrobiology, the physics of time travel, and UFO studies, together with information Hamilton has gleaned from 6 months of interviews with Dr. Burisch. In light of multiple sources of inside information, Hamilton has constructed a larger picture of the U.S. government's alleged interaction with alien beings. Bill Hamilton has been a respected researcher in the UFO field for 50 years. Among the published books his published books are Space, Time, and Gravity, Center of the Vortex, which was published in '79, Close Encounters Report, Cosmic Top Secret, Alien Magic, The Phoenix Lights, and numerous magazine articles. An Air Force veteran who specialized in electronic technologies, Hamilton has also demonstrated a keen understanding of a variety of scientific genres. His formal studies have included psychology, physical science, and information technology. He is currently working on a book about time travel. If everybody would please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Bill Hamilton.
Thank you, Steve. I want to preface the presentation tonight with a little of my philosophy here. So now, to begin with, we're going to go into Philosophy Class 101. Then, unfortunately, this is not going to be Ufology 101. This is going to be graduate level tonight. So I hope some of you are familiar with things like the Roswell incident, Majestic 12, government cover-up, because we're going to talk a lot about that. First, I want to talk about the interaction between beliefs and perception, how your beliefs influence perception and how your perception influences your beliefs, and how authorities use this knowledge to influence you. For instance, everybody remember TW-8 Flight 800 off of Long Island? Eyewitnesses saw a missile launched from the service, and one even videotaped it, and over 100 witnesses saw this going up toward this Boeing 747, and then this plane exploded and its wreckage fell into the sea, and all the crew and passengers died. The government of the United States, despite the embarrassment of having been caught in court rigging lab tests and lying in its reports, still officially attributes the disaster to a spark in the center fuel tank, while government spokespeople insist that the witnesses who saw a missile hit the jumbo jet are all drunks. All 100 of them, right? On September 11th, 2001, that famous day which we just had an anniversary here, at the World Trade Center towers, you saw Trade Center Tower 1, 2 come down, and then here's this building called Building 7, by the way, which housed a CIA unit, security unit. Well, Larry Silverstein owns that building. He owns the whole WTC complex, and he admitted on September 2002 in a PBS documentary, America Rebuilds, that he and the New York Fire Department decided to pull the World Trade Center number 7 on the day of the attack. The word pull is industry jargon for taking a building down with explosives. Now, why would they do that? American Flight 77 hits the Pentagon on that fateful day. And yet, the hole in the side of the Pentagon wasn't big enough for a full-size aircraft, American Airlines, and its huge wingspan. I mean, here's this hole only about 14 feet in diameter. That was the original hole. Now, radiation experts claim high radiation readings near the Pentagon after 9/11 indicate depleted uranium was used. A high-ranking Army officer claims a missile was used at Pentagon, not a commercial airliner. Way back, just a few years ago, in 1997, the Air Force made an announcement on the 50th anniversary of the UFO crash at Roswell that a mogul balloon, which was top secret, crashed. You know, every time I think of that, I envision a balloon crashing into the earth and all of this debris spread out over acres. And that the aliens, which were seen by some of the witnesses, now why they brought up the aliens, I have no idea, were nothing more than Air Force crash dummies. And they released a huge report, which was entitled Roswell Case Closed. And of course now, new witnesses have emerged, and it's anything but a closed case. Another perception was that witnesses of the Phoenix Lights on March 13, 1997, something that I was personally investigating when I was living in Phoenix, were nothing more than military flares. But these were not flares. They didn't have the pattern of flares. They did not smoke like flares. But that's what people believe. Why do they believe all this? Well, two things. First, there's an fallacious appeal to authority, which is a way of blocking a discussion about a contentious subject like this one by invoking some authority considered as beyond dispute because of his prestige and ascendancy. Or you appeal to the majority as a way of answering a contentious question by sustaining the reasonableness of a certain point by putting forward and accepting without critical questioning the opinion and the will of the biggest group. Now, there's many, many instances of this, of what you see on television, what you perceive there influences your belief about some event. Thereafter, your belief will further influence your perception of other events and some of the same people that are involved in it. And it's well to be aware of this. Just tell you a little story and we'll get started. And that was in Gulf Breeze, Florida. There used to be sighting parties going out and viewing this unusual, unidentified object that came in on a regular basis, floating out over the waters. And there was a man who went out there with the sighting party, and he was sitting on one of the park benches. They were at a park, and when the UFO appeared, and they told him, "Oh, look, 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 turn around. You have to turn around. Look, look, it's over there." And he said, "I don't want to turn around." "Well, you won't see it." "I don't want to see it." "Why not?" "Because I don't believe in them." Okay, first, to lead you into Project Aquarius, we're going to have this slideshow, which I entitled The X-Files and Z Division. The Z Division is at Los Alamos National Labs, which is the center of a lot of studies that have gone on where not only debris from crashed UFOs has been taken and examined, alien artifacts of various kinds, but even the first live alien in 1949, known as EB-1, was taken to Los Alamos, to a certain unit there. And some of the information that I've been given on it, even in writing, from one source who is a scientist there, and from another source, is that EB-1 had was very worrisome because he had tremendous, what they called psychic powers. For instance, there was a jet plane out on a runway, and he decided that he, like Yoda, right? He wanted to move it. But EB-1 was afraid of humans. He was here, left here alone. And what he was picking up in the way of fear and aggression from the humans around him scared him more than it scared us to have him here. Okay, first slide. Of course, we have the incident, 1947, alleged to be an unidentified flying object, living out, part of it crashing on the Brazel Ranch, kind of north by northeast of Roswell, the town of Roswell. This is the one where there are all kinds of other claims, like it was a Horton flying wing that was being experimented with. With the latest version, that there were mutilated Japanese pilots in it, and it was being carried by a balloon. Another version is that there was a weather balloon. Another version is there was a mogul balloon which was used with sensors to see if it could go into the high altitudes and detect nuclear radiation from the then Soviet Union to see if they were testing atomic weapons. Most of the insiders have been in contact with, most of the witnesses who've come forward say that it was definitely, and they don't mince words about it, a spaceship from some other world. Okay, next slide. A very important figure in the history of this subject is Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was chairman of the National Defense Research Commission and Office of Scientific Research and Development during World War II. And he was also on the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, which eventually became NASA, and chairman of the Joint Research and Development Board from 45 to 48. 1947, made a director of AT&T, and he originally chose some of the members of the special study group, which became known as Majestic 12. Next slide. Here was one of the original members of Majestic 12, Dr. Detlef Bronk. As you can see, he was a member of the Atomic Energy Commission, member of the Scientific Advisory Committee at Brookhaven. He had a lot of scientific credentials. Good choice. Next. Then there was Dr. Jerome Hunsaker, and he was an expert in aeronautics and mechanical engineering, and probably an advisor on the aeronautical design of this vehicle, this vessel that they recovered at Roswell and at other locations. Okay, nobody, by the way, knew this was a top secret study group appointed by President Truman in 1947. And there was a leaked document around 1980 to researcher Bill Moore that spelled out, it was called the Eisenhower Briefing Paper by Rear Admiral Hillenkoetter, who at that time was in the lead position for Majestic 1 in 1952. And these papers talked about the crash at Roswell and a couple of other aeroforms of unknown origin that came down. Okay, next slide. Then we had Dr. Lloyd Bergner, Secretary of the Research and Development Board, directed studies of weapons systems evaluations, and he was a member of the CIA secret Robertson panel in 1953 on UFOs. He was also allegedly a member of this, one of the 12 of the special study groups, one of the original members. Next. Not an original member, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, well known for his the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos, allegedly was at one of the crash sites, the crash site that was near Trinity site, according to documents that were released to Dr. Wood, Robert Wood and his son. And when I studied where the coordinates were given in the documents, I was amazed to find that it was probably within 100 yards of where the first atomic bomb was tested at Trinity back on July 16, 1945. And Oppenheimer, apparently in secret, was sent to this site, and he took 3 paperclip scientists with him. Paperclip scientists were these German scientists that were had emigrated to the United States. They were hired by our government to work, many of them at the White Sands Proving Grounds, because of their knowledge of rocket technology, a superior knowledge they had in German science. And back in 1947, Oppie took them out there, and we'll have a next slide. And one of these was Werner von Braun, the rocket scientist. He went to Roswell Landing Site 2, was a great rocket developer. His mentor was Herman Oberth, who had made a statement that he believed that UFOs were interplanetary spacecraft that generated their own artificial gravity fields. And that would be the only way that he could explain how they seem to nullify both gravity and inertial forces. So I know I've been in touch with an ex-NASA engineer who had a top secret clearance, who had cocktails with Werner von Braun one night. And Werner was there, and he sketched what the craft looked like. He sketched with what one of the alien bodies looked like. And Clark is his name, was looking at this napkin and said, "Boy, as soon as I can, I'm going to grab that napkin and put it in my pocket." Well, I guess that Werner was having a little bit too much to drink, and his hand tipped over his drink, and it just doused the napkin, and of course smeared the ink all over it. So that was the end of that. Next. Another paperclip scientist that went to landing Site 2 was Dr. Ernst Steinhoff. And he apparently was an expert in aeronautics and meteorology, so that apparently there was a storm when this craft came down. and he was consulted on that. He was one of the paperclip crew and part of the pioneering rocket group at the White Sands Missile Range. Okay, next. Then there was Dr. Hubertus Strughold. By the way, these are all in the Aerospace Museum of Honor in New Mexico, Alamogordo, New Mexico. And he had an MD degree and was one of the first doctors in the School of Aviation Medicine at Randolph Field, Texas. And he was very active in the Air Force Aerospace Medical Program. Wonderful guy to have out there to give an evaluation on the bodies that they found. Next. This is a photograph that has only recently seen the light of day. It was leaked by a scientist from Los Alamos. It was evidently taken in the, I'm going to say it was probably taken around March 15th. And I say that because it was taken in 1958, and on March 15, 1958, the first conference was held by, and I was the one to identify the center figure as General Ennis Whitehead, first to sit down and draw up an alleged treaty with the aliens called the Tau 9 Treaty, a treaty which allegedly, according to Dan, is renewed every 9 years. And we have not identified all of these people. If you look in their hands, they have cameras. One has a movie camera. There's another officer who's bending down here. Okay, next. Okay, this was the next photograph released in 1964. On the far left, we have identified that person as Dr. Oppenheimer. They're at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. They are probably headed up to Site 17 to make an exchange with the extraterrestrials, and in 1964, that's when EB2 volunteered to stay here on Earth as part of an exchange program, while one of our scientists, it was arranged that one of our scientists would be taken back to his home planet around Zeta Reticuli 2. Next. Here is the support team. This was taken in 1953. It must be almost 100 engineers and scientists. They were Majestic Scientific Advisory Group. Way over in the front row, second from the left, is young Dr. Theodore von Karman, the founder of Aerojet, who had also participated in reverse engineering alien machines for Majestic. Next. And believe it or not, we have one colored photo from August 2003 taken at Los Alamos, and somebody had designated it was an MJ-12 reunion with Starlight teams Victor and Sierra. I haven't been able to identify anyone in this photo, and I'm always looking for somebody who would. All of these are published in a new book by Robert Collins and Rick Doty. It's called Exempt from Disclosure. And if you go out to my website, there's a link to where you can purchase the book. Next. This, according to Dan, was his boss, John Mike McConnell, who was once the director of the National Security Agency. He's in private practice now. Vice Admiral. He is in the position of number 1, MJ1. Next. I don't know what number he has, but this comes from several sources that Admiral Bobby Ray Inman is current Majestic. As you probably guessed, a lot of these members are aging now, And they don't replace one of the 12 until one of them dies. Last year, one of them died. And according to the sources, and of course I cannot verify this, but for the first time ever, they have chosen a woman to be a member, Majestic 12. Okay, next. Of course, one of the primary things they're engaged in is reverse engineering alien spacecraft, beginning with the recovery of the mysterious craft that crash landed near Roswell. And we're now beginning to get a lot of information about that. One guy who just recently popped out of the woodwork, retired in 2003, and he was head of security at Area 51. He had access to all areas, including S4, and is now in a kind of part of a very small loop in email exchange in which he's trying to describe some of the testing he has seen, where we have put, we have used the alien disk, the alien propulsion, and we put a nuclear power source aboard, and avionics we developed for our Air Force pilots, because they cannot control the machine like the aliens do by their mind, their brain waves. They cannot control their minds as well as the aliens can, and they might think up and then suddenly get distracted and go sideways, and there's a mountain, and that's as far as she goes. Now, as far as I know, people have been out there along Highway 375, including myself. I used to go out there during the middle of the week, sometimes in October, and even in October at night, I've felt temperatures that drop to 22 degrees because it's nearly a mile high up there. You can see the glow of lights in Las Vegas, about 100 miles to the south. And way off in the distance are the jumbled hills, which separate the area we know as Groom Lake and the Groom Lake complex from the Papoose Mountain or S4 complex out there, where craft would come up so high, glowing, kind of hover for a while, maybe testing a few things, zigzag back and forth real fast. One time, one of these craft decided to come right over the highway, and there was a guy named Gary Schultz. He took a photograph of it. When it did, it shows a dome disc. Came over the highway another time and put down a beam of light right on this guy's truck, and then went zip back. I don't know what they were trying to do. We think there's also alien craft that visit out there. There have been craft reported of huge dimensions, like 2-3 football fields in length, the size of battleships floating in the sky. Okay, next. Field propulsion is being considered by a lot of our young engineers today. I got the specs and drawings for this one from a guy named Mark Tamayan, and I have it on my website. And he wants to build field propulsion, electrogravitational field propelled craft. Okay, next. Here's the tester model of the Roswell aeroform. Bill McDonald, a friend of mine, is kind of a forensic artist. He's worked with police trying to reconstruct faces. Well, he has reconstructed this from talking to multiple military eyewitnesses, and they said that this craft can change its shape or morph in flight. Well, guess what? We're testing morphing aircraft at Lockheed, out where I live in the Antelope Valley, and I even saw an F-15 that was fitted with flexible wings. So next. Here's an animated drawing of the Palmdale plant, which has been awarded $9.3 million in an Air Force contract for a morphing plane like this. This one, of course, is what they call an uninhabited aerial vehicle, UAV. some of our pilots are worried that these kind of craft will become smart one day and they won't need pilots anymore. Okay, next. One scientist working in the field of zero-point energy designed this prototype, and I was very interested in it because it's very close to some of the things that I experimented with myself. By the way, you will see a paper on my website with a photograph of the device that I worked with back in the 80s, I built, and I haven't really done too much since then, but I had some of my own ideas, and my ideas have morphed since then. And what's interesting, beside using a superconductor in this, he's talking about this, a plasma field within a torus, which I'm very, very interested in because one of our sources from Lannel talked about one of the craft had a drive just like that. So this guy spent about $1 million building a model and ran out of money. He's trying to promote it again. He has a website. Okay, next. Another thing that may have come from making a study of alien technology is nanotechnology, because these craft are not constructed the way we construct airplanes. They grow these flying discs. And now we think maybe they're using nanotechnology, and this is called a nanotube, and it has a tremendous amount of strength, and the body of the spacecraft could store power. And if it could, then you wouldn't need heavy batteries. Surfaces could bend themselves, doing away with actuators, or circuitry could be embedded directly into the body of the spacecraft. And when materials can be designed on the molecular scale, such holistic structures become possible. So the lattice over here of carbon atoms on the left is a carbon nanotube. Okay, next. This is some of the new satellite photos, which are extremely clear. This shows the stated development of the Groom Lake complex at Area 51 today. As you can see, it's not something that's been abandoned. They could not afford to abandon this. Has several, an Air Force general told me has at least 5 underground levels that he knows of. And yes, there is still some alien technology underground at Area 51. Most of it is over about 10 to 15 miles away in Papoose Mountain at the Site 4 facility. Next. One of the ways that we conceived that the aliens could get here from there without taking years and years, like 10,000 years to get here. I mean, you'd have to have an awful long lifespan, is using wormholes. And this drawing depicts a wormhole, which is a distortion of space, so that theoretically you go in one side and come out the other side light years away. There's also a possibility that you can go into a wormhole and come out in an alternate universe, some scientists think, or in a different era of time. Okay, next. One new technology being used with torpedoes and submarines is called supercavitation. And it's like making a bubble around the entire torpedo. And what happens is it removes the drag or the resistance of the fluid medium. And therefore, the torpedo can move at super fast speeds, or the submarine can move at super fast speeds through the water. Likewise, an alien spacecraft has a kind of a bubble around it that it generates with its artificially generated field. It's a kind of a electromagnetic gravitational field, and this removes the inertial resistance of what I consider to be the space medium itself, which I define as a superconducting superfluid. In other words, it's a fluid without viscosity. Okay, next. And another concept, only it's a relativity concept. And here we're showing from the Star Trek craft Voyager, from the series Voyager, is the possibility of, again, creating a bubble around the ship and moving it faster than light. And the ship is actually not moving within the bubble, right? Okay, next. Now, the Z division was established in July 1945 to work on nuclear stockpiles. All the work there at Los Alamos revolves around nuclear physics or nuclear medicine, anything nuclear. And what they have done, because there are layers of classification, secrecy around nuclear projects, is they slide the alien technologies under it and make it even deeper. So Z division is one concealment of where they would have stored some alien technology. Next. And it got its name Z division from Gerald Zacharias, who was brought in by Robert Oppenheimer, and from the first letter of his last name. And this is just a photograph of Zacharias pouring a chemical into a molecular beam experiment. Next. All these technical areas, TA-49 is an area containing so many structures on the Los Alamos map. It's surrounded by a locked security fence, and it's located on the Frioles Mesa site near Bandelier National Monument, which is allegedly where Majestic 12 has a hidden meeting place. Next. This is a drawing, leaked document of one of our projects. This is our thing where we tried to reverse engineer an extraterrestrial energy device known as the CR, or crystal rectangle. According to this scientist, we have a lot of these artifacts like the crystal rectangle in a vault below ground at Los Alamos that we don't know what to do with it. We don't even know totally understand how it works. For instance, under a microscope, you can see that there's a lot of little black holes in this rectangle. They know that it uses a rare isotope of hydrogen, hydrogen-5. And they know that if you draw, let's say you draw 2 kilowatts of energy from this crystal rectangle, and by the way, they have taken it aboard the shuttle. They've taken it into space to experiment with it. You draw 2 kilowatts from it, just keeps providing. You say, well, we need 10 megawatts now. Okay, draw 10 megawatts. It never depletes. Totally, our physicists don't understand the physics of it. And this scientist said we had to scrap our theories and start from scratch again. Okay, next. This is just the header of the top secret DIA report. Now, according to this new security guy, he said the code word here is bogus for the DIA, and yet he said when he looked at the contents, like about this crystal rectangle, that's genuine. And he said, Mr. Collins, I'm surprised the FBI hasn't knocked on your door. Well, the truth of the matter is there's another guy who's a friend of Collins, Dr. Kit Green, who's a medical doctor, who, despite his protestations, has also been briefed when he was a member of the CIA. And the FBI came knocking on his door asking about these documents and trying to tell him, they must be fraudulent. Why were they so interested? Well, right now, They can't stop it because it's published. Okay, next. We had Jack Schulman in the American Computer Company talked about the Z division and coming into possession of the lab shopkeeper's notebook. It described a capacitor that had immense storage capacity, said to have come from the Roswell craft, and they called it transfer capacitor, and it could store 90 gigabytes of computer storage in this small device, and he wanted to market. But after posting it on the internet, he got into a lot of disputes, and he was talking a lot about the Z division. He had some visitors with official badges, and he kind of like decided to go low profile. Next. Originally on the, we had a guy in the 90s named Bill Uhouse. That was not his real name. He was a mechanical engineer. He was one of the first ones after Bob Lazar to come out and talk about working for the satellite government, working on a flight simulator. And here's a drawing of the simulator. And this was to train our pilots on flying these flying saucers before they get into a real one, right? And it was on a gimbal, so it could tilt up to 65 degrees. And the supervisor, the scientific advisor he finally met on this project was about 5 feet tall, spoke inside his head with his own words, and he was called J-Rod. So that was the first time we heard the word J-Rod, only we all mistakenly thought, ignoring a couple of things that Bill said, that his name was J-Rod. No. He was called A.J. Rod because of symbols. He made signs and symbols and was interpreted. These were very ancient signs. It looked like a J and a rod. When linguists started to study this, they said this is equivalent to the number 15. Mr. Uhouse spent 38 years playing a formative role in the ultimate unacknowledged special access project, the literally subterranean program for perfecting functional flying discs. Okay, next. I show here hydrogen-boron fusion focus reactor that Eric Lerner, who's a plasma physicist, is working on with other plasma physicists. And Bill Uhouse had mentioned that the aliens mined boron. That's one of the things that we're interested in here on our planet. And the fuel would be hydrogen and boron in this fusion device, and they're harmless, non-radioactive substances. And when they fuse at extremely high temperatures, they produce only helium nuclei and no neutrons, no radiation residue. So maybe the aliens had some kind of a fusion reactor that they fed the boron to, but there's like Uhouse was fond of talking about 1,000 different uses. Okay, next. Here's the Taurus device. This is a quote from the scientist Eben Kraft to Eben, extraterrestrial biological entities they called Ebens. While electric charges cannot be conducted from the charge accumulating fluid, there's a fluid, directly through the toroid walls and edges, there will be a capacitive effect which will accumulate charges of an opposite polarity. So I'm just showing demonstration here on the right. The one on the left was a drawing done based upon a craft that an abductee was aboard. Next. Here is an actual FOIA response given to John Greenwald. And it's maybe the first official confirmation that a Project Aquarius is related to UFOs. The top item here, which you can't quite read, is dated 10 May 1983 and specifies Wright-Patterson's FTD, or Foreign Technology Division. So now I think that's the end of that slide set, and we will go to the Project Aquarius. See, that's a good segue to the Project Aquarius. Oh, and here's the book, Exempt from Disclosure. There's a link on my bookstore on my site at astrosciences.info. Story of an Aquarium Scientist. There's my website, by the way. Note that. I have a lot of information I keep putting out there. Okay, next. Okay, now I'm going to introduce you to the man here, Dr. Dan Burisch, previously known as Dr. Dan Crane. He had his name legally changed in Las Vegas, Nevada. I have the court record on that. He showed an aptitude for microbiology when he was a young boy. He got his first microscope when he was only 5 years old, and his first telescope a couple of years later. When he was only 8 years old, he was taken under the wing of the director of pathology for a major hospital in California. He was born here in California, Southern California. And I recently found out he had a reunion meeting with this doctor in Las Vegas recently. And he's very precocious. He's a brilliant man. He was taught the art and science of histology, medical microbiology very early on. So let's go to the next one. Dan was recruited in 1986, according to his story, and he is putting it down in detail in a video debrief right now. I'm going to just pause for a moment to tell you that what I'm telling you has become extremely controversial, just like the Bob Lazar case. But to an extreme degree, there's a lot of polarization. There are certain individuals on the internet who have called Dan directly a fraud and a lot of dirty names, okay, which he doesn't deserve. Others who idolize him, okay, that's not me either. All I did was, and I was alerted to the document that was leaked called the Q94 document. It was the most technical document I had ever seen. It had a lot of biological, microbiological terms in it. I first saw it in 1999. Negotiated with the lady who sent me a copy, who was going by the name of B.J. Wolf at the time. That was just a pen name that she had on a book called Eagles Disobey, and it was about Inca City on Mars. And it was ghost-written for Dan and two of his compatriots, and so she had to learn more and more about Dan. She said as she did, she found out that he worked up at the Site 4 facility, Area 51. He was in black operations, and found out more and more about him, which story was not the complete truth. But it was enough to hook me, and in April 2002, she asked me for some help, and because her original intention was, we're going to spring Dan. And I'm going, oh yeah, right. What we'll do is we'll pick him up in a car, we'll transfer him to another car, we'll drive him down to Hollywood, and I'll put him on a TV station just like that. Boy, was I dreaming. I don't know what I was dreaming that night. Anyways, that wasn't about to happen. Before I left for Las Vegas to meet with Marcy, she called me at work on a Friday in the late afternoon before I left, and she said, "How would you like to meet Dan when you come here?" And I said, "Can you arrange that?" And she said, "Yes." And so I went over there in April 2002, walked into our meeting place, which was in a library, and I first saw Dan sitting at a table. He had a briefcase open. He had papers spread all over the table. I was dressed casually, but I have a lot of hats, and I had one of these baseball caps that said U.S. Air Force on it, because I was in the Air Force. He saw this. He just grabbed all this paper, stuffed it into the briefcase that he had, shut the briefcase, grabbed it, and ran for the elevator. I said, "Whoa." I said, "What's going on, Marcy?" She says, "I'll handle it. I'll be back in a minute." She went, tried to explain things to him. About 5 minutes later, came back into the room, beckoned to me, and he shook my hands, and the first time he was shaking. He says, "You understand I have to be careful." And I said, "Can we talk?" And he says, "Let's go to a private room." We got a private room. My first talk with him lasted about an hour, and I asked him questions. And during that time, he answered one question in such a strange way for a man who was a scientist that I about fell out of my chair, because only somebody who had some contact with an alien would know this. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, the aliens are numerologists." I went, "Yeah, I know that. How do you know that?" Right? And we got into a study of the special numbers that they like the number 9, which is a key number. This is why they renew their treaty every 9 years. 2003 was supposed to be the last treaty signing. They said, delay it 1 year till 2004. Why did they do this? Because of something he again told me during that first meeting called what drives the whole program, the reason for the cover-up, which doesn't have to do with the fact we have ETs in our skies, is because of the doctrine of the convergent timeline paradox. And I said, "Oh, what? What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you see, the treaty is renewed every 9 years all the way up to the year 2012. Oh, 2012, boy, that rings a bell. Yeah, he said, "Well, we've been there before. That's when the catastrophe happens. And we're trying to sidestep around the catastrophe. You can't tell the people that. Where's this alien from? He's us from the future, 52,000 years from now." Huh? Time-traveling aliens that are us? Why is he in this gray form? He says after the catastrophe, a period of time, the human genome split. And one became the J-Rods and the other became tall, blonde Nordics. So that it was like you take the left brain and split it from the right brain, right? And the qualities of one went one way and the qualities of the other went another way. And I say, "Oh, I see. Nobody will believe it." Here's Dan at an earlier time standing outside the little alien. He was approached by agents that said they worked for the Department of Naval Intelligence. Don't look it up. Doesn't exist. There's an Office of Naval Intelligence, not a department. Bob Lazar had one of his tax forms, and there was a Department of Naval Intelligence on there. That was one little piece of evidence that journalist George Knapp had that Bob Lazar worked out at S4. When I talked to Dan's mother and father, John and Dodie Crane, John Crane said, I used to help out Dan with his taxes because Dan's not real savvy with finances. And he's brilliant with science, with biology, with chemistry, but not with finances. And he said that was the same thing on his form that he got from the government, his W-2 wage form it said Department of Naval Intelligence. Okay, next. Here's just one thing inviting Dan to join the New York Academy of Sciences. He said that he got his PhD from State University, New York. There's a possibility that the New York Academy of Sciences gets new PhD candidates, lists, and sends them an invitation. We can get no confirmation that there was ever a student by the name of Dan Crane, Dan Burisch, or any combination thereof at State University of New York. We do have a notarized statement by a man who worked with Dan, who said he was going to go into a business on the side with Dan, called State University, New York in 1995, and they confirmed at that time his PhD. We have another notarized statement from his mother that said she got it in one of these cylinders that you get in the mail. So he had that document, and then it was handed over to his wife, who promptly put it away in a vault and made it inaccessible. Okay, next. But we do know that Dan graduated from the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, and here he is working in a chem lab. He wanted to be a medical doctor at the time because his grandfather died of cancer. He wanted to find a cure for cancer. He was excellent in the field of biochemistry. He refused to falsify some test results that one of the professors was experimenting with, I believe it was Laetrile, on mice. At that time, it was a popular way to treat cancer. And he refused to endorse the test results. And the professor said, I can blackball you at the school. And he went home, and his father brought him back, and he enrolled in psychology just to finish up his degree. But he does have all the credits requisite for biology, and he even has a graduation ring that says BS in biology. Okay, next. Dan didn't always work up at S4. They only had him working up there a couple of years. I think from 1992 through early 1995. And then he lived in town. He was only called up every now and then for in an advisory role, or they would say, get out your microscope, we want you to look at this, different things like that. So he had taken a regular job as a parole officer with the sheriff's department, later on in security. They were required to have jobs like this. Well, for one thing, Majestic doesn't give him a paycheck. They will provide for his needs, but no paycheck, nothing traceable anymore, right? Especially since Lazar opened up his mouth. So, you know, his wife worked, he worked, and he wanted to follow up on something he had learned directly from direct communication with the J-Rod, which was to drill down into ancient bedrock up here on Frenchman Mountain, which is on the east side of Las Vegas, coincidentally near where John Lear lives. And there he picked up a sample of something down in the bedrock that he looked under a microscope, and this is when he discovered this amazing particle he calls the Ganesh particle. We do not know what it is. He believes it's some kind of, well, I believe it's a micro form of what we call ball lightning or plasma. But this thing carries a program, and it seems to emerge when a crystal is electrically stimulated with a certain voltage, seems to emerge out of what he calls a portal. Now, what does it do? Well, he discovered if you put a cell, a denuded cell or a damaged cell, near this Ganesh particle, it generates what in biology they call a cross bridge. And the cross bridge connects with the cell and regenerates. Dan has gone way beyond that to the point of where he now thinks on any planet where you have silicon dioxide, which means you may have oxygen in the atmosphere, silicon dioxide in the soil, where it can form crystals, you may get these Ganesh particles, and it may be these Ganesh particles that generated the first monocells, prokaryotic cells, our ancient archaean cells, and maybe even further on eukaryotic multi-celled creatures. But, and I agree with him here, because the more and more I studied molecular biology myself, I had to go to class at UCLA to try to keep up with some of this terminology. I also came to the conclusion, being that I am a information technologist and have worked with computers and work with codes, that DNA is a code, and that code contains an instruction set. And it seems like out of all the DNA in the human genome, 93% of it seems to be inactive. But now they know it's not what they used to call junk DNA, but that this DNA also plays a role in producing what DNA produces, which is polypeptides, amino acids, and chains of molecules that become proteins, which become the structure of our functioning bodies. It's all as if it were designed by a magnificent intelligence. Of course, myself, I have gone to the point, because of some of my own personal experiences, of reaching the conclusion that the entire universe is expressing a substrata of itself which is encoded. All of its laws, all of its rules, everything from subatomic level on up is generated by code. Okay, next. These are the diagrams done professionally. According to Bob Lazar, the first level, Papoose, it's actually Papoose Mountain, not Papoose Lake. Papoose Lake's on the other side of Papoose Mountain. It's just a dry lake. Carved into the base of the mountain is a lab containing 9 hangars with 9 separate discs. Like he said, we don't know how we acquired these, whether they crashed, whether they were given in exchange, whether we shot one down. But he worked on one particular model he called the sports model, because it was like a jazzy sports car. Okay, next. Now, this drawing was done according to Dan's description of underground level 4, where they installed later on biological labs, and a special level 5, where an elevator bypassed level 4 and went down at a slanting angle to get down to level 5, in which there was a special, he said, environmental chamber, in which the J-Rod, who was suffering from a peripheral neuropathy because of some kind of degeneration in his system, was housed in a special environmental unit. And there was a suite, which he called the ambassadorial suite, and you'll hear and see Dan talking about that soon if I hurry up. Okay, next. This is a drawing that Dan did of the degenerated J-rod from reticulum 4. Okay, next. Here's just a star diagram of zeta reticuli 1 and 2. Next. Here's a picture of Dan spending his time looking through microscopes. Next. Here's a photomicrograph showing a Ganesh particle emerge through a portal. Okay, next. Here's just a scheme he has called Hyperspace to Earth, a notion of how the lotus works. He calls the whole thing lotus. And he believes it comes from a divine source. Okay, next. More micrographs of the Ganesh particles. I brought up the term biophotons. He asked me to do some research on biophotons because I'm more familiar with physics. And I did so, submitted a couple of papers on this. He made those papers part of his project papers and delivered them to Washington, D.C. And I went, what did I just do? Okay, next. Dan is now retired as of March 2005 in emeritus status with respect to Majestic 12. So as you could see, when I first met him, he was still operational, serving as science director of Project Lotus. Okay, next. And here's the book that I wrote, soon to be coming out. They're working on the galley proof right now. I understand this process will still take another 3 weeks, so I may not have copies of this until next month. Okay, that's the end of the slides. Okay, the first question, Dan, they want to know is, where did you work in the mid-90s, and how did you come to be employed there?
Well, several locations in the mid-90s. I had some cover positions here in Las Vegas, which made me look like a good old-fashioned Joe. In fact, I had some police experience at the late 80s. You're probably centering your question around the work for the government. In 1986, I was approached while working as an undergraduate student in Dr. Bert Bell Barbero's office, in his parasitology laboratory, to be exact. I was looking through a scope at the time. 3 gentlemen walked into the laboratory, closed the door behind them. There was 2 uniforms and a suit that were present. Both of the uniforms I would make as most probably being United States Navy. My memory of that one event's kind of hazy after seeing all of the suits and uniforms and whatnot. We spoke for a while. They asked me if I was interested in seeing the world and the like. I told them I in fact was. We went through several interview processes, not unlike this, and reviewed my background. I went through several background investigations. Finally, starting up 90-91 time frame, I was cleared for working past groom to the Papoose Mountain facility, that place that doesn't exist, about 90 miles north of here, the nowhere place. That's how I came to work there. My original assignment was at the Groom Lake facility to review histopathology slides. And I went through nearly a year's testing and then was basically let loose for a year, and I heard no contact from them. After that, I was brought back in and shown some higher grade slides of unknown origin. Following that, I was introduced into a working group and subsequently brought into the Papoose facility, the Site 4 facility. We worked for well over a year on slides of unknown origin. After I took a minimum leadership position under several of the other biologists who are already present, most of which are now deceased. You know the names of those individuals. I was then introduced into the level 4-5 facility, and the 4-5 coded for 9. You're aware. We covered this in ancient history. And so what we did is introduce the new members, myself amongst them, into the clean sphere area, and we were eventually shown the subject for which we were examining the slides. The slides were unusual in that they were in pressurized cells, and they were reviewed by us on a conveyor with a completely automatic microscope. We weren't touching anything. We give verbal commands. At the second instance, we were finally allowed to have a VRML, like keyboard, for examining the slides, and I digressed, but then working with the J-Rod itself in the ambassadorial suite, or the Clean Sphere suite.
Now, was this under this Project Aquarius?
Yes, yes. Okay. Initially, I was assigned as a working member of Project Aquarius. Then finally, I was made an assistant working group leader. And then mysteriously, after one meeting with the J-Rod, I was asked to take the working group leader position. I didn't find out why I was asked to take the working group leader position until, well, within this last year. I never understood it, because Stephen was older than I. He was my senior not only in ability, but in age. And I would have never figured being advanced above an individual like that in ranking within a working group. And in fact, I never considered myself above him. We worked together. The Q94 document that you have in your possession was co-authored. My name went on there as the primary investigator, because I was the working group leader. But in fact, he and I were both involved in the authoring of that document.
Oh. Okay. Now, could you explain briefly what you were briefed on who and or what J-Rod was?
Initially, I was briefed that J-Rod was an alien, specifically from the reticulum system, to reticulum 4.
Okay.
I had no idea the truth. Yes, from 2 reticulum 4 now, but I had no idea the truth of how they came to be. As I said to you before, I have never met an alien, but I have met an extraterrestrial. I found out subsequent to interactions with the J-Rod. And again, they have personal names. The term J-Rod simply means 15, which was a basing name for where they're located, the number of light years from our location. So they took those names, and they identified through the Sigma protocols, the linguistic protocols, with a rod symbol, which was an inertia symbol, and the letter J. And in fact, that was a combination of Mayan and Egyptian numerology having to do with a rod and a J, meaning 10, and 5 for 15.
Okay. Now, 15 light years away, is that the Cleese 876?
876 Charlie, from what I've been told.
Okay.
Now, he did not specifically tell me that was the location, but the number 15 was mentioned.
Well,
They don't call it, apparently, Cleese 876, whatever Charlie.
How did J-Rod get here? I mean, how did he, 15 light years away, that's...
He crashed in 63, from what I understand.
Oh, is that right?
Outside of Kingman.
Okay.
Kingman, Arizona.
Right.
There was a problem involving his physiology and his biophysiological communication with the craft went wrong. And of course, he's ill, as we know, with the MGUS and the paraprotein associated problems. And he crashed.
And how was he transported immediately from that crash site to the S4 facility and housed?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That
So
I don't know.
you don't know how he came to be at the facility in the first place?
I believe he and associates were transferred separately. He to the originally to the Green Lake facility,
Okay.
and an associate to, I believe, Los Alamos.
Los Alamos.
I have no independent verification of where the associate went, though. All I can say is that he was there at Site 4. Right?
Now, you interacted with J-Rod. Was there a general procedure for this interaction?
Well, there was not a general
Protocol?
procedure. There was a very specific procedure.
Very specific, okay?
After we would be brought in with our helper biologists, there was controlling helper biologists, those in the gallery, and then the introduction specialist, which was myself on a number of occasions. We entered the clean sphere through a large series of protocols involving pressurization and compartmentalization, no pun intended, until finally we were pressurized in fully encapsulated a TEC, a TES, total encapsulated suit for entrance into the clean sphere. Once we were pressurized and entered into the clean sphere, well, I should digress, we had a medical evaluation and all of that first. But they ceased doing that after a couple of medical evaluations. It was more just interested, let's get you in and get the work done. I would enter into the clean sphere, and I was not supposed to communicate with the J-Rod at all. I was not supposed to know his name. The reality is we were communicating from the time that I entered into the ambassadorial suite external to the clean sphere, talking back and forth freely. I could hear whatever he was projecting at me from thought, and he could very clearly hear what I was thinking. I say hear meaning perceive. I was supposed to stand over by a hologram projection system, which was run as like a teleprompter system, over to my right, that would be run inside of the clean sphere glass. Hold my hand up and mimic certain signs, and it became a joke. It really did. It became a joke. Those folks who were watching from the gallery running the show thought that I was standing there and mimicking the signs, and this was the only communication underway. They perceived on the day that the approach, the close approach that he made, the grabbing incident that he did with me, they perceived that there was a communication that occurred. So I began getting questioned quite extensively whether or not he in fact was communicating with me, because he had promised not to, apparently, with the Sigma unit. I alluded to the fact that there was conversation underway, but I didn't talk about what it was until, of course, I was caught in my research protocol forwarding ideas that were somewhat different than what they expected, where they expected my private research was going to go, and this is much later. And at that time, the deal was brokered to find out about the doctrine for the convergent timeline paradox. I told them a little bit about what he showed me, a little bit, and they told me a little bit about the DCTP.
Now that you brought that up, which implies travel through time as well as space, and you said that J-Rod was retrieved from a crash near Kingman. Was he at that time just traveling through space from the staging area, or do you know? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
He wasn't doing any time traveling at that point?
No, not as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Not as far as he told me, no.
Can you describe J-Rod to us, what he looked like and how he behaved?
Yes.
Okay.
The gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall. He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized clean sphere. He exuded glycoprotein-like material through pores on his skin. which was associated with the neuritis, the neuropathy that we were dealing with.
Did this have an odor to it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I couldn't perceive any odors whatsoever. I was inside mine. But I would imagine, but I have no data set to say what it would have smelled like. And in fact, there was nothing I read that indicated whether or not there was an odor. Why? I'm wondering. You've asked that before. That's why I'm wondering.
Well, yeah, I've heard about this secretion coming through the pores of the skin before, and there have been those who've had encounters who say they could smell an odor
Okay.
from the skin.
All right. Where were we?
You were describing him?
3.5 feet, large head in comparison to torso. So the ratio of the cranial to the torso area would be larger than in what we would call a modern human being. Large bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out. So it looked like a large pupil, basically. When you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. Large arms, large length. 4 very thin, sinuous fingers. Nails, not as long as presented in some of the images that you've showed me in the past. The ones done by Tom Mack, was it?
Bill Uhouse.
Oh, yeah, that's it, the Puppet Master photos. I'm smiling because Puppet Master leads me to other nicknames.
Right.
But he was hunched over most of the time, could not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy, and that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy which he was suffering. So he would grunt and move toward me almost in a flopping fashion. Feet were large in comparison to what we would say our feet would be.
How many
He
toes?
was unclothed 4.
4.
Yeah, he was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. His feet were unusual in that his plantar area had a very large knob underneath what we would call our heel. His facial features were grotesque in comparison to what he showed me what normal would be. He was
Normal of his type?
yes, yes. He was bilaterally symmetrical to the extent that the disease process was not changing his facial features. Nose was recessed, not a nose like we have, but basically two operculum, 2 orifices. An extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth. His musculature, again, it was suffering from the problem at the myoneural junction due to the
Do
neuropathy.
you have any idea what his chronological age was?
622.
622 years. Okay. What is the normal lifespan?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know. That number 622 is now used as an important number within the community.
Okay.
A reference, a request from 622 or a report from 622 could be from anybody. So it's used, and in fact the SRP report that I have with me today, the supplemental report for 0302 that I have, probably is labeled from reviewer 622. I haven't it's going to be a cold reading when we look at it, but it's probably from 622.
Okay.
They excrete in a manner that we would excrete. Their external genitalia are different than ours. The females have somewhat like vulva, but they have a clasper situation. The male has a male clasper, the female claspers. And if it looks like a disc with rectangular solids that are rotated into position for clasping at the inguinal region. They do have internal fertilization.
Now, this was something you read because you didn't see a female, did you?
No, this is something he showed me of his wife.
Oh, internally.
Yes.
And how was that image presented to you? Did it appear?
I was inside the image.
You were inside the image,
That's what it felt like.
like virtual reality. Or?
Yes. Everything that he showed me when this was the incident. When he projected it into me, it felt like I was there. My sensations were heightened. Quite extraordinary.
Was there a background perceived? Was she in a domicile of some sort?
Excuse the pun, a gray surrounding. Very, very dull, drab surrounding. Almost like a concrete evacuation center. Where you'd have evacuation zones underneath the hotels in case of mass casualties or mass disaster, where it was a very clinical environment.
Huh. So were you impressed that he was kind of depressed about his situation?
He was extremely depressed. If we were to term him human, I'm not a psychologist, but I think he would be termed as clinically depressed.
Okay.
He wept, but he didn't weep outside. He wept when he was with me.
Well, could you estimate what his level of intellect was?
Smarter than me. He was smarter than me by a long range.
Did he have a wide range of knowledge?
The mathematics that he showed me blew my mind.
Oh, is that right?
He showed me concurrently not only the equations for the rule of nines, but he also did so diagrammatically, and he did so with three-dimensional, like a VRML system, where I was watching cubes come together. So that if I was not understanding the script, I would understand it as a child learns group theory in mathematics. Highly evolved, highly intellectual, highly repressed emotionally. When I was with him, I felt great happiness to be with him, but I could feel his great sadness, not only because of what he wanted to become, what he knew he was by being present with us, but where he was and how he was being treated. He was not part of the group that has to be catered to involving the T9 treaty that was just signed. He wanted to help. He was willing. When I went in, for God's sakes, I took well over, nearly 300 individualized aspiration samples from his neurological system. He would hold his arm out for me to take them. There was no pain medication. And whenever I would fire the introduction system to remove the sample, it was an aspirative evulsion system, he would cry, and then he would just stand there and look at me.
There was a suction, wasn't there?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, I would bring the sample after the initial removal from his tissues into the introduction system, and then approve it and move it from there to one of the helper biologists. Usually it was Robert, outside of the clean sphere, and then he would move it from there to be handled under our normal protocols. It was a level 5 past our, the BNBL system. He'd just stand there and take it.
So, do you feel the communication that he established with you when you were in contact with him, could he extend this communication over any distance?
60 feet.
60 feet.
Definitely 60 feet.
Okay.
It
So,
was 60 feet from the center of the clean sphere to the introduction ramp going down into the ambassadorial suite. So at least 60 feet.
so you don't feel like he's been in communication with you since that time?
No.
Okay.
Was it selective in some way? Was it willfully selective on his part, who he wanted to communicate?
Yes. Yes. The folks that I'm sorry. The folks that wanted to find out what he was saying to me, they knew darn well that he was communicating with me after a while, because I was smiling. I couldn't help it, because we were actually joking back and forth. And they didn't know. They didn't have any clue. They didn't have any clue what he was saying. So it had to have been selective. They certainly wouldn't have pressed me like they did after I woke up from the big attention scenario. I woke up outside of the clean sphere. I was drug out of there by Stephen. He finally got a secondary suit on and drugged me out of the clean sphere. No, they had no clue. They had no clue what he was saying. I'm sure of it. They were extra rough in removing my plug and my catheter and all of that business after I got out of the TES.
Now, one of the things that I want to ask you now, departing slightly from this subject, we're going to ask this last question, then we're going to take a break, okay? And then we'll see where we go from there. But
I'm smiling because I'm envisioning the lack of the lights.
yeah, okay. But everybody's been
I don't like this
asking
at
me
all.
why, and of course you're going to have to restate this again, why are you talking to us now? What is your intention in telling us about this, about your involvement?
It's multifocal.
Okay.
It's multifocal. There's several reasons. The largest reason is not the most important reason. The largest reason from a personal perspective is to step out from under the Black Ops community
Okay.
and retire. I'm ready. I told you before, I can see myself walking along a pond and not being bothered by anybody except for maybe a bird here or there, and taking a sample and just taking my time and looking at it for fun, for enjoyment.
And you're worried about your health, right? And about,
Well, my health is degrading. There's no doubt about that. The heart disease that I have is in fact degrading my health. Time is coming. I don't know how long that is, and of course that's within God's providence.
so you would like to maybe have some freedom, to have some time
Yes.
of your own,
Yes.
to go to Walden's Pond or something, right? And study the life.
Disappear at Walden's Pond.
Right.
There are other reasons too.
Okay.
Now, without yelling the poor me scenario.
All right.
Yes, people have a right to know. I mean, that's, other folks have screamed that. Some of them, I think, real. Some of them phony as a $3 bill. Yes, they have a right to know what is going on. They have a right to know because this is their future. Or maybe not. And it depends upon our wisdom or lack thereof. This gets me thinking. The one thing that we've heard from the Brookings Institution study, the famous clamp study, was this would cause a great social upheaval It would destroy our social bonds, our religious bonds. And in fact, I know I'm digressing, but I ramble. Every time an individual is approached with the issue of, would this destroy your faith? I have heard, this is my experience only, I'm sure there are going to be varied opinions, no, it would strengthen it. It would strengthen it. From a certain perspective, yes. From another perspective, no. The Brookings Institution was correct on a certain level. Suspend disbelief for a moment and walk with the idea that this is real. That the ruins that are present on the moon and on Mars, the ancient temples, were in fact, and are in fact, the gifts of our own progeny. Can you imagine what is going to happen when those temples, which were prayed to as the gods, are found out to be nothing more than the creations of men, that the men themselves were those who were being worshipped? Will fall headlong into the pool of Narcissus. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we'll find truth, love, God, in something other than buildings and stones and marble. Maybe we'll find out who he really is. Or she, it, or just us.
And each one of you needs to decide for yourself whether he is speaking the truth. I cannot decide that for you. I'm just here like an attorney in court. My father was an attorney, presenting a case to the jury saying, this is, there's a good case for this man being who he is. And there is supporting evidence for this. There are a lot of things still that do not make sense. There are gaps, there are discrepancies. I admit this to you. But I feel fundamentally at the core of this man's story, he is telling the truth. But only time will tell, and like he said, it is our future that matters here. And I want to thank you very much for listening tonight.